two things did not sit well with me after watching the hour-long podcast between Carl and Laura Lentz on his scandal. Number one was that it seemed like there was no mention of Jesus Christ at all in this whole hour-long episode of this podcast. Even I watched the second episode halfway through it. There's none of it. There's none of it. Number two was that there seemed to be an overemphasis on Carl Lentz's, by Carl, on his reputation, how people perceived him, what people thought about him. And I kind of got the feeling walking away from this episode that I was like, oh, maybe he still does care a lot about how people perceive him. My name is Aaron. I'm just a guy, right? A pastor with an opinion, trying to talk my way through understanding what happened here. And it seemed, I watched this whole podcast, and the overarching theme was devoid of Jesus Christ. There was no aspect of this where someone would walk away saying like, oh, Jesus' forgiveness, his mercy, his grace upon in Carl and his family, like that's what healed them. There was none of that. Matter of fact, I got the opposite. Carl, he worked, he put the time in, he looked in the mirror, and he took blame for himself, and he could have shifted to other people, but he didn't. He took on that blame himself. And I did this. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I did this whole work. I work on myself. I worked in the last 3 years, and it seemed devoid of grace and Jesus. Now, you did mention Jesus' name. The name Jesus was mentioned towards the end of the podcast, and it was like a offhand comment on him preaching, and it was like the subject, like I talk about Jesus' grace and mercy and forgiveness. I was like, okay, he's going to talk about it now, and he didn't really talk about it. And even he asked his wife, Laura, he was like, I don't know where you found the strength to stand by me after all that's happened. And she didn't even mention Jesus. Like, I guess I was looking for the type of verbiage that sounds like, I'm a sinner and God saved me and he hasn't left me. And so by extension, because he showed me grace, mercy, and forgiveness, I could extend that to you too, Carl, and I will never leave you the way Jesus never leaves me. I guess I'm looking for that type of verbiage. I don't know if that's too strict, like too narrow. Of course, this is just an hour. I'm sure they've had multiple conversations, but within this episode, if that's the purpose of their podcast, is to kind of glorify and edify Jesus Christ and the healing of their marriage, I did not get that from this podcast. Matter of fact, like I got the opposite here, and I see that very clearly in this clip when he's talking about, hey, where do we get a second chance? And you're gonna see how he thinks that second chances come about.
And I'm grateful for that. I look back now at that situation. I don't even relate to it as this horrible tragedy. I relate to it now as a moment in our story that I got saved again, that I got a chance.
Hold on. So I think he mentions like, I sense like a little distancing from this, actually. In the beginning of the podcast, he talked about how it was 4 years ago and his wife is like 3 years ago. So like it's a distancing in time, and it's a distancing in terminology. He's like, that situation, that tragedy, he doesn't call it like a scandal. He didn't call it like repetitive cheating. I mean, maybe it's too harsh to call it like that, but I don't know. That's kind of splitting hairs there.
To be free again, that I got a chance to be honest again. And not everybody gets a second chance. Yeah. I've taken mine, and I'm living in it, and I'm going to keep living in it. And that's my story. That's my encouragement for anybody going through it. Like, how do you get a second chance? Choose it and use it. And didn't even mean if that's a rhyme, but it did.
Choose it and use it. And that's how you do it. It's like that's what he said that the purpose of is like that. What I want to tell people is that how do you get a second chance? You choose it and you use it. That's not gospel. Like what? Jesus gives you the second chance. Jesus gives you the second chance. Use it. God gave him a second chance. God heals his family. God healed that family. God is healing and healed that family and healing him. And by the way, I like that he said that. He is healed and healing. But that the means of that, it's like a works-based mentality that at least I got from this podcast. I did not get a sense that I'm sure it is, right? It is, but I didn't get the sense that he acknowledges that grace and forgiveness and mercy from God is in this podcast or in his life and his family, and that's what healed and is healing his family. And I simply did not get that. And I guess I was looking for that type of language and verbiage. And you let me know in the comment section down below. Am I being too strict on what I'm listening for as evidence for regeneration, I guess, is what I'm talking. Repentance, at least, and change, life change, true life change, and heart change in his life. The second thing that didn't sit well with me is the fact that I got the overwhelming feeling that he still cares about his reputation, like, greatly. I'm not going to say about more than his family. I wouldn't say that, or what's important. But I got that sense walking away from this podcast, especially if you listen to this clip here, where he's talking about, he dissects like where a lot of his angst came from. And just as a recap throughout the whole episode, he's talking about how a huge revelation was that he can't change people's minds, and he wishes he could go to each individual and say sorry. And he, I cared about like my reputation. He even mentioned himself, I cared about my reputation so much. And so this is when he talks about the church's reputation and how he let down the church, and really in contradiction, not Jesus Christ.
And with fault, there's things that have to be said when there's opportunity to say it. And it's my fault that a lot of people that we love, our church especially, were put in a position where they had to defend or they had to disassociate. I get that. And our church was always controversial. I've always been a bit of a lightning rod with some of the stances we've taken. So I think our church became accustomed to like, no, our church might look like this, but it's this, and defend. And then people stood on it, and then this comes out, and I just cannot imagine what that would have felt like. And I'm so sorry about that. I'm sad about it, but it's my fault. And I accept responsibility, and to the people that stood tall and defended us and were a part of all that we built. I cannot wait for a brighter day. It just broke my heart to know that people who have been standing up for me my whole life. I gave ammunition to everybody who wanted to say something about big church, about pastors like me. I gift wrapped it. And I recognize that even the pastors that I loved, who used to be my peers, I recognize I made their job harder. And anytime one pastor falls, it has a ripple effect, especially when it comes to other ministers. And I have apologized to the men that I know when I can, and to those that I might not meet. That's the truth. It's my heart. I'm so sorry that.
And I really sense that, actually. I sense that he is very remorseful about, letting people down. But that's the thing. It's like he's letting people down. And not that that's not important and you shouldn't apologize for that. Don't hear me wrong. But it's like, first things first, right? It just seems like that he's very remorseful about, letting down the people who stood by him, how people think about him, how his persona is, his image, his reputation. He said reputation multiple times. He said things along that vein. He mentions this whole thing about disgraced, and how I get this defensive sense that he's like trying to set the record straight. Like all these lies, he's trying to set the record straight because there's all kinds of lies. And he even mentioned something that's actually really profound. It's great. He said that, if I'm operating in the middle ground where opportunities of people can lie about me, that's my fault. And I agree with that. That's actually a huge nugget, right? That's a lesson that, like, yeah, you shouldn't be toting around the line and so that people can lie and say they saw you cross the line. You should be so far away from the line that you can't even see the line is a dot from where you are. And so I took that as a way of like edification. Like, I got that. That's some wisdom right there. But it's that he was so hell bent on setting the record straight and setting these liars straight that he just wanted to sit up and fight back. And how could he fight back if he's trying to heal and trying to change and all that stuff? And so that whole section about a disgraced pastor and all that stuff, and how he dragged his wife's name and her reputation because his wife is an extension of his reputation. Like, so he is hurting his own reputation in a lot of different ways. So yeah, I sense that he still cares about his reputation. Now, what I do love about this is that he took a lot of blame. things seem genuine, sincere. He was talking about things like he's already worked through them, which is great news. But I also did see some defensiveness. But of all the things that like kind of like the lessons here is that, man, it is hard being a pastor, this mega church pastor, because what happens is, undoubtedly, if you're a good speaker and communicator, you don't have to be a half decent one. You could just go online, copy everyone, the best speakers in the world, and change it enough so no one could kind of see where it is. You know, you can track where it is, and maybe you put your own spin on things, and then people will start telling how fantastic of a pastor you are. And he's probably been told these things. He probably had an entourage of close people because the locus of power was him, so they could make decisions on the church. They probably people were probably saying, oh, what you said changed my life, and I'm gonna get a tattoo of it on my body, and that saying really stuck with me, and it saved my marriage. And he's probably saying like, oh man, I'm a hero. He even said it. It was like a Freudian slip. He's like, I'm a hero. I'm not gonna say I'm a hero. I'm a trusted individual. No, you really thought you were a hero. Matter of fact, I mean, I've been there, just being honest. Like, you know, you think that, I think that I'm just this here, that I'm this here, and I need to put guardrails because I need to block out this praise from man, like freaking jujitsu. You know what I mean? Like it's because my nature is inclined to puff my head up, to make my ego so big. Like I'm just like, you know, I gotta fight that off. Like every old lady is gonna pull you aside and, you know, tell you you're the next big superstar church, you know, person. You know, like it's it's crazy. You saved my marriage, y'all. All this stuff. The world loves you. And for him especially, he was a celebrity. Media loves you. Celebrities loved him. It's a recipe for disaster. We can't, as people, human beings, sinful human beings, we can't shoulder that. You need to fight that off. And a lot of times I can't help but to draw parallels to David, right? With David, he fell into sin, and you know, hopefully the same result ends up. Like Carl Lentz is a man after God's own heart. Not saying that this changes fast, but isn't 3 years like quite fast? It's quite fast. Let me know in the comment section below if you think that a 3-year turnaround then to talk about stuff publicly and openly is fast. I think it's kind of fast. But maybe I should be more charitable. Like all this criticism, I do hope and pray that, you know, God is continually healing and showing him what forgiveness and grace and humility is like. I do hope for the best. You know, all the criticism, and I think it's fair. Let me know if I'm way off my rocker. Let me know if I'm just totally just being the devil's talking right now. But from my perspective, that's what I took away from this podcast, the 1.5 podcasts that I listened to, and that. But in the end, I hope he finds that he's a man after God's own heart, that he becomes the David of our generation, starts to preach and teach in such a way that's conviction. There's conviction, and there's experience, and there's wisdom, and there's humility, and that it brings a lot of people to Christ. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Give me your reflections down below, and I'll talk to you in the next video.